Well, they have a tour later on, so after the forum, you can, if you're interested, just take a tour. There are some really cool offices overlooking the harbor, so which is pretty nice. Let's go on to the forum here. Please have a seat. We've got some seats in the front as well. I'd like to invite our guest speaker and my good friend today, Mr. Derek Quick. Please give him a big hand. Now, I'll let Derek talk about himself later on. Some of you know him already, so he's quite famous. In the whole purpose of the forum, it will be a little bit different, mainly because for those who have been in the previous forums or in previous Pitch Perfect, you'll see how different it is from normal seminars. And one of the things I want to do, don't want this to be just a forum where you listen to what we talk about. I want this to be more like a roundtable discussion. We have a half round table around here. But then again, I want more interaction because from us investors, we're here to help you out. But we don't know how to help you out if I don't know what your challenges are. So it might be something like funding, it might be something like how you're looking at investments, etc., etc. I want a little bit more interaction. If you like, 你可以講廣東話，冇問題。你可以用普通話，亦都冇人普通話也可以。But we'll answer in English for the whole purpose. And the whole topic for today, we're talking about Hong Kong's bridging role, right here, smack in the middle in the global world today here. Because everyone's changing, things are changing every day. So let me just move this a little bit back. So yeah, feel free to ask any questions anytime. Just raise your hand or whatever. One of the things that I want to talk about here today on the topic will be on the bridging role, like I said. Now, there are a lot of people talking about what is happening to Hong Kong, because China is growing up and going down or whatever, and there's a lot of different economies around the world that's starting up, and there's a lot of things moving around. So what is the purpose of Hong Kong as a little bit of city around here? What's its role here in terms of the projects that we see, and also in terms of investments that we see? Now, before I go on to that, let me give it to you, Derek, first, and talk about what you do as a bio, a little bit bio for everyone else.
Okay, I don't like using these things, so if you can't hear me, tell me, I'll speak louder.
Okay. I need it.
So I work in venture capital. I don't know how many of you know what that is, but basically all the stuff that you see in the tech world with all these startups and what's going on in Hong Kong with Start Me Up HK this week. You have a lot of these startup companies. They have these great business ideas and need to commercialize them, and they go through certain rounds of funding, friends and family. Then you have the angel investors, and then you have your venture capital firms. So I work in that space where we fund these really cool business ideas, and we help founders commercialize them. So I might not look like it, or maybe I do, but I've been doing this for a long time, a lot more than a lot of people that you might know. So I've been doing this since the late 90s. During the first internet boom, most people here that have the experience have only been part of the second internet boom, right? So they've only been around since Groupon, and their experience is that going forward. My experience started a bit further back, so I like to say that I've seen different cycles, seen all the different scenarios of different startups, both from the ones that did really, really well and the ones that didn't do well. One of the greatest examples I like to give is in year 2000, I used to work for a company which was a larger fund, and I was responsible for interviewing all the new business ideas that came in through the front door. And in came this guy with this business idea, and his name was Jack Ma. And he had a company called Alibaba. And I wasn't my own boss at the time. I had a few bosses, and I liked this company. I took it to my boss and said, we should invest in this company. they said no, so we passed them the deal, and the rest is history, right? So another investor, SoftBank, they invested $12 million into Alibaba, and at the peak of its Hong Kong IPO, that $12 million investment became $2 billion.
Wow.
So I wouldn't be here today if I had that opportunity. But I think the venture capital is a very high risk asset class. It's not like investing in property or something that's more stable. So there is a lot more work that you have to do. I think the first wave of internet companies that failed, part of it is because the companies themselves weren't very good, but the other part of it too is that the investors themselves were not very good. So on both sides of the equation, it didn't really work out. Much better this time around. The whole ecosystem that we have today, especially in Hong Kong, is much more robust. You have the structure there. You have a lot more supporting elements, which you didn't have before. So now we have Cyberport, we have HKUST, and we have all the universities that have all of these supporting mechanisms that help foster all this creativity. Investors are better, the startup companies are better, so it's much better this time around, and it can only get better from here, right? So it's only going to improve. So I've been doing this for a while. I guess that's where I can.
我講兩句，
多
我用
講多
廣東話，我用廣東話得。
呢都得㗎。
我姓黃嘅，咁咧就我咧就係一個電子工程師，係搞硬件嘅。一直以嚟咧，我都係非常之中意創新嘅。咁咧就我覺得咧個題目係香港點樣 bridge the world 咩 global 嗰啲咁嘅。我自己覺得咧就即係以我見到你哋即係好多呢啲咁嘅所謂 pitching 啊或者咁嘅，即係以我見到好多都係同啲軟件係有關係嚇。咁我就覺得咧就除咗軟件之外咧，我自己覺得硬件亦都係有唔少嘅機會嘅嚇。咁硬件咧就而家好興嘅所謂嘅 IoT 啊其實唔止嘅嚇。亦都有好多，譬如係喺 LED 照明啊，或者係我所謂嘅 smart appliance 呢方面咧，其實亦都係有唔少嘅機會。OK， 咁我自己覺得咧，如果你話喺香港嚟講咧，佢有一個比較上非常之吸引。其實我以前喺中國發展多啲嘅，咁呢一兩年咧就翻到嚟香港。咁我自己覺得香港咧嘅最近嘅科技創新署咧提供嘅資金即係而家所謂嘅 ESS Enterprise Support Scheme 咁咧就亦都係提升咗咧喺香港對即係提升俾咗多啲嘅資金同埋多啲嘅機會同埋多啲嘅環境，俾喺香港如果係有興趣係喺 technology， 但係我哋唔係講一啲好 fundamental 嘅 technology， 係一啲好實用嘅 technology。
或者一陣間我哋可以講埋呢樣嘢。
我覺得呢個都係應該係要留意下。
Sure, of course. Well, thank you, that's Cedric. One of the things that he mentioned about was the IoT and also the funding in terms of to the IoT and environment area, which is coincidentally what's happening right now in PMQ today because there's an IoT summit going on here. But thank you, Derek, for the brief bio around here. Let me talk about a little bit myself. I am not your normal angel investor. I signed up not as an investment person, not like an iBanker. And that actually gives me a little bit of an edge against other bankers right now because what I started out is pretty much like, I started out like 95 as well. We were the first internet people. He was investing in internet, I was actually working in the internet area. And one of the things that I went into IBM, which is, well, there's one old colleague around here, Eric around here, from IBM days, which is good. And then I started off in terms of the sales and marketing and do strategic consultings and also helping companies setting up offices in Hong Kong. And later on I ventured into helping VCs to save distressed companies. So managing, going inside, saving it, spinning it off, and then sending off to other companies. And so one of the things that I do, we also invest, we also look into different areas. Of course, I'm an investor as well, not experienced as Derek, but of course, on the other side, I have an event pitch platform called Pitch Perfect, which is pretty successful right now. And we group in all different projects coming in from around the world, and we're looking at different projects, finding co-investments, finding investors coming in, and also in a way that we can also help manage some of the distressed companies as well. Because one of the things that we see today is not about getting more projects, because there are more and more projects coming along here, but in terms of how we sustain that project ongoing as a business itself, because that's more important. And that's the key topic that we're trying to talk about today is we look at Hong Kong's role, how competitive we can be, because hey, if you're talking about the market, Hong Kong is small, it's not as big as China or India or Russia, but then again, we got the expertise, we got the connections around the world, how are we going to leverage on that? One of the things we just mentioned, or Derek and I has just finished, was an interview, media interview with two medias around here. And we talked about how the difference between what's happening in Hong Kong and also different government intervention, and also in terms of the role of Hong Kong being, okay, are we going to help the startups and build the startups around here, and how we leverage Hong Kong's branding in terms of, hey, are we going to look at just Hong Kong market, or are we expanding to China or to somewhere else? So in terms of that, let me go to the second topic. Second point is, from our experience, what are we seeing different today in terms of the projects that we see? So Derek's very experienced in overseas at the same time. So I want to see how you think about the projects first, not the CEOs yet. The projects first in Hong Kong as compared to other parts of the world. It can be China, it can be in US or other places as well. Any fundamental differences?
Well, I think in Asia, the startup community here is a bit different than, let's say, what you see in like Silicon Valley. Or Silicon Valley, I see is a lot of where the sort of the new ideas and the real creativity comes from. But out here, the startup communities are also tied in with the investors. And investors out here tend to be more conservative in their approach. So anything that happens in the US, they want to wait to see if it really becomes something big, if it becomes interesting, then they start to do their research, and then they start to look at evaluating that risk. So when Facebook became really important, or became more noticeable in the US, it was only when it got to the news here that investors here started looking at the idea and started thinking about, oh, maybe this is something that's interesting. All the while, the opportunity to get into that investment became more and more expensive, because the more rounds of funding that comes in, the valuation of the company goes up. So it becomes more expensive to get into that same opportunity. So I find that out here, it's more of a wait and see opportunity, whereas if a company here decided to come up with something really new and creative, investors might be a bit taken back by that and say, well, how come, why isn't anybody doing this in the US? They're looking for that Western validation before coming here.
Interesting enough, a few companies I'm looking at right now, I look into other countries as well, and recently there's Business Sweden. I think you were there. I kind of like saw you around. Were you in Business Sweden, the launch?
Yes.
Okay.
I saw you there.
Why didn't you say hi? Okay, anyway, I was looking at one of the fintechs, and they're doing lending platforms. Well, we're pretty much like normal, because everyone's doing a lending platform. So he has some money, he gives it up and put it on a platform, and he sort of like controls the rate, and so he gets better returns on an online platform. Now, one of the things that I saw this company is a little bit different than most of the platforms was that it's in Sweden, and they got support from one of the biggest banks in Sweden, so as an official partner. And also they're talking fairly closely with the Trade Commission, with the government people as well. And that was quite a fundamental difference as to all the different lending platforms that I see, where people are just doing things themselves. and hopefully the government doesn't catch up on them. And of course, the government will catch up on them until you actually become successful. And so that's one of the fundamental differences where I see in certain parts of the country or certain parts of the world, there are government support where it's closer support, it's a smaller government where there's a more direct connection coming in with it, which is pretty much like a validation from the West. But then again, we're talking about the validation from the government itself. So this is one of the things that I see that in the Western world, there's a little bit different in terms of what's happening in Asia. Of course, when we talk about other lending platforms or other fintech platforms, we will also look into how, if you get a license, there's a recent news from Hong Kong right now, WeLab, which is the WeLend.com website, which is pretty much the lending platform as well. And they got a new round of funding. And the reason why I said they could get a new round of funding was that they got the money license, money exchange license. Now, in a way, we see Uber cases like this where you're not getting any official licenses and you're trying to do things yourself, and then you get into a lot of trouble, but you still get a lot of public support at the same time. So this is just one of the fundamental differences that I see. It's happening, it's changing around the world, where people talk to me and say, hey, I want to be disruptive, and I say, well, you can be disruptive, but you don't have to be going against the law. So this is one of the things that I see in terms of training, where you have, if you're starting up a business or if you're looking into investment itself, maybe it's time you look into smart companies where they know how to play the game in the market itself. Anything you want to add?
No, I think that pretty much sums it.
Anyone want to ask any questions? It's an open. So there are entrepreneurs, there are investors around here. Are there anyone here who wants to? Yes. Oh, sorry. Let's give it.
I guess. Okay. Well, just say that the entrepreneur is different in Asia in many ways. So as compared to the U.S., same as the investor as well, I imagine. So if you say the VCs in Asia is a little bit more conservative, do you observe any difference in the characters of the startup? I guess the startup founders in terms of the way they manage the business and how they grow the business, and the way they see other, I guess, competitors or friends in the ecosystem. I mean, and does that really affect the way you invest, let's say, in Asia versus, let's say, Europe? I think that question's for either of you, and maybe for Derek.
Well, it's a good question to ask. I think it really, rather than generalizing, it really depends on the founder. I've seen so many different scenarios. I've seen founders that they just want to get the company listed, and as soon as it's listed, they're out, and then they buy a building, and then they're done, and then they really don't care what happens to the company. And then you have others that are more traditional startups where they really have that passion, and they want to grow the company. They're not thinking about IPO. They're not thinking about sale. They just want to grow the company, right? But if you're an investor, how do you exit that, right? So there is a difference in terms of, and that's the investment choice you have to make as an investor. Is like, what is the motive of the founder? What do they really want to do? Right? And that takes a lot of finesse, because it really comes down to the psychology of the person that controls the company. It's not about the business plan. Anybody can write a business plan, but it's about the psychology of the person. Right? But then you can also say the same thing about the investor as well. What does the investor want from this? So you look into the past deals that they've done. How have they exited those companies? The mind of an investor is also very complex, because some investors, if they invest in a company, maybe they partner up with other investors that have similar companies and they merge them together. Maybe they just want a more structured exit, so they push the company towards a public listing. There's sort of different ways, but you have to, I think, on both sides of the equation, each one is specific to the either to the person, to the founder of the company, or to the investor. So it's not, you can't really generalize that.
Well, one of the better analogies I normally use is how you find a girlfriend or a boyfriend. So there are beautiful girls, beautiful guys, good-looking guys outside, but hey, of course, everyone wants to have the model girlfriend, but not everyone gets the model girlfriend because for whatever reasons, for many reasons outside. And sometimes you just have to know where the matching actually comes from. Let me give you an example. One of the companies I'm looking after right now, looking at trying to invest and see how investors are going about, a bunch of French guys. They're living in Guangzhou. They have the company registered in Hong Kong. And they have their demo sites installation, some of the projects installed in Singapore. And they're going back into China and see how we can expand that. So if you're talking about like the mentality, which Derek has mentioned, it's different people have different mentalities. But then again, if you combine that to different mentalities of different cultures, living within different geographies, that complicates pretty much everything. Because their mentality is very different from French guys living in Paris. They are very different in terms of how they think. Of course, everyone wants to see how we can expand in China, and I'm trying to help him on that one here. But the mentality has really been skewed these days because it's more international, it's more global market here these days. And some of the people say, hey, what do the Chinese think, what do the French think? And I say, it's pretty much different right now. We try not to generalize that. And what Derek said, it's more about the psychology, it's more about how, at this point, this moment, what you're thinking and how, as the owners, you think as a business itself, how you actually work with it and how you actually leverage it. One of the key things I normally look at is I don't really look at the product. I help a lot of product companies, different brands, help them in terms of customer acquisition and services. But the last thing I look at is the product, because I really want to know that why is someone in particular now is paying personally out of their own pockets for your product or service. This is the fundamentals. And if you can answer these fundamentals, it's very hard to actually look into a business and say, okay, you may find 1 or 2 rounds of funding, but then again, okay, what are you gonna do for a living? You keep on finding funding, or you actually make a business out of it. So these are the fundamentals in terms of, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think what I've gotten out of the, like what you two have said about the landscape in Hong Kong or in Asia particularly, is that it is a lot more complicated than, Silicon Valley sounds like it is. I mean, it has to be assessed on a case-by-case basis. And if that's the case, then obviously it would need a lot of manpower. And obviously, if that's the case, the variable changes so much. I mean, how much does the law of numbers matter when it comes to investing if that's the case? Because if the predictability of, seems like the variable has increased so much in Asia, then there isn't really a set formula in terms of how you find a winning company, so to speak. Or, people who you want to invest with, right?
Well, the traditional Silicon Valley model is a startup looks for money, the venture capital firm funds it, but they expect you to run out of it, and they expect to refund the company again and again and again and again. That is the traditional Silicon Valley model. Right? Out here, you do that to an investor, they get scared, right? Because they put in 1 round of funding, and then the company comes back and says, well, we're out of money now, we need another round. Well, do you top up and increase your stake, or do you pass the bucket around and go find another investor? Because that next investor is going to say, well, if this company's that good, then why aren't you, the original investor, putting money back in? Right? So it's a different thing here. So in general, a lot of venture capital firms out here that call themselves VCs, they're not really VCs. What they are like mini private equity firms. Should they risk a lot of capital, invest in an early stage company, which is high risk, or should they piggyback a big private equity deal, but that big chunk of money they put in, it only ends up being, percentage-wise, only ends up being a small amount of a bigger deal, where you have larger investors coming in, more established companies, probably a more liquid investment, and piggyback that deal, and other people are doing the due diligence, and you just ride that, because it's easier, right? It's different, right? I think, so a lot of firms out here that call themselves VCs, they're not really VCs. They're more many private equity firms. You know, it's less risk.
Well, one of my own personal experiences, I have some of the VCs in terms of saving some of the companies, and one of the key things when they're calling me in, and sometimes it's too late to save, or they don't have the money to actually save it, because it's like normal investment where they, hey, put in 1 round, 2 rounds of funding, and then they thought about, okay, something's not working around here. Either they put in more money, which will dilute a lot of stuff, or they find new investors coming in, which is what Derek has said, it's pretty hard because, hey, if it's so good, then why aren't you investing in it and the numbers are not doing very well? You find someone else to come in and they don't have the money to actually pay for the consultant, where you have to think about, okay, different ways of actually just reducing the risk coming along here. So it's quite a little bit different in terms of and we're comparing with some of the new age kind of investors and the old traditional investors, where some of the traditional ones were saying, hey, I'm just investing in like real estate or property or like stock markets and all the traditional kind of companies going forward, as opposed to the new kind of companies that it is, which is probably something that's totally new, haven't thought about, like Airbnb, Uber, or even something else, which there is no case study, there is not really a track record or any references outside, and you just sort of like, okay, let's bet on something that looks or may look pretty good later on, and see how it goes. And that's one of the fundamental problems that we face as well in terms of finding new investors coming in, where, okay, we have to tackle the fear factor, where, okay, this is a risk, because we're not talking about like PE stakes. PEs are like on listed already, so there is no safety net, there's pretty much nothing. And we were talking about just now in terms of the safety net in China, which China has just launched in Shanghai right now. There's a safety net issued by the government where if the startup loses money, the government will actually just pay you back. That's a new kind of policy coming along here. So we're still looking at that, what exactly is that policy, what the process is, and how that impacts to the entire market around here, because that will fundamentally change some of the environment, and also how we actually as investors, or how the education system as well for the entrepreneurs, the three trinities around here that we also look into. But yeah, when we talk about one of the investing things is, hey, there's always a fear factor, especially for those who have not been investing in the areas around here, because it's like new grounds. And many of the investors will say, hey, I'll just invest in the areas which I know well. Say, for example, I've been doing IT or technology for 20 years, so I just invest in places where I know well. So, but then again, when we talk about new technology, even 20 years ago, even from last year on, IT is very different from the IT by tomorrow. So we're talking about IoTs and everything coming along. Any more questions? Yes, at the back.
Hello, my name is Loic. Thanks for sharing.
Do you mind standing? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for sharing your opinion and experience with us today. I just have a quick reaction on the 2 examples you gave. The 2 types of entrepreneurs. The one who is long-term committed and doesn't want to IPO, and then the second one who is more goal-oriented, just to IPO and doesn't really care about the business. I see on one side, the first one is going to be resilient. It's going to continue pushing even if it's going through difficulties with the company. And the second one might be maybe less motivated, but has more chances of exit for the investors. So you as a VC and as an angel investor, in your opinion, what's the most, which kind of investor, which profile do you prefer? The more motivated or the more exit?
I think it depends on the product or the service that you're investing in, right? So, especially in technology, if you're investing in a company, let's say, that makes handsets, like mobile phones, right? As time progresses, the cost of mobile phones comes down, and it gets more and more competitive to be in that space because your margins are thinner because you're really just a hardware company. Maybe at that time, a few years back, that would be the appropriate time to get out, to exit the company, do something else. But if you stay in it, you're just going to ride it downhill. Right? So a great example is is a company back in the, I guess, the mid-90s, a company called UT Starcom, which is a company that makes handsets in China, in Hangzhou. And they were one of the darlings of Wall Street. They listed on NASDAQ, star performer. Every year is like 15% year-on-year growth, did fantastic. And because the founder of the company thought that, well, the Nokias, the Ericssons, and the Motorola's were all going in the direction of putting all the bells and whistles on a phone. So color screens, video, internet, all of those things. He thought maybe in developing countries, people just want to make a phone call. They don't need all the other fancy stuff on the phone. So he was looking at doing the low-end handsets, the dumb phones that just make phone calls, and the people that actually use these phones didn't even leave their city or their town. So you don't even need like a 3G network or a 2G network. It was like 1.5G. So just nothing advanced. But as consumer spending increased and people became richer, even developing countries wanted to buy that second-hand Nokia or that Ericsson or that Motorola handset, right? People were willing to save up all their money to buy these more fancy, higher-end phones. And what this company didn't do, UT Starcom, is they didn't change with the times. So over time, nobody wanted their cheap handsets, and even the developing countries could afford to buy the more colorful ones, and they didn't change their business model. So slowly, their earnings dropped. In the end, they had to basically pivot and change towards making broadband routers, which is even more competitive because now you're competing with the Huawei's. And then that was a downward slide for a company who is one of the biggest tech hardware companies on NASDAQ, and then it slid. So that's just an example of it really depends on the company. Of course, what you're looking for as an investor in the management team is someone who's resilient, someone who can actually pivot or be flexible and change with the times. They're able to, because the startup world is never about, I want to be rich. That's the worst motivation you can have to be in the startup world is for monetary reasons. It's got to be because you have a passion, because the startup world is so painful. It's so much hard work. It's so stressful. But if you like that, then you have that resiliency to keep moving forward.
Well, another analogy that I normally use is as an investor, we're spotting captains of a ship. So the CEOs, the companies are the ship, and the CEOs are the captains, and we're not driving the ship itself. So it's best to leave the driving of the ship, where to leave it to the captains. But as a VC, as an investor, if I'm going onto this ship, we're on the same ship. So I couldn't bail up immediately and get a flotation device and swim off. I'll be in it with you together. But I will be spotting if an iceberg is flying over or is coming by. And I will warn the CEO as soon as I know about this. Now, we talk about the flexibility in terms of the mentality of the CEO. The CEO has to be open-minded, flexible as well, and also be willing not to be too egocentric, because ego normally loses a day. One of the things that I also want to talk about is one of the companies that I saw invested and managed previously was a company called Checkpoint. And they had a special division inside which they needed to spin off because it was losing money. It was a listed company in New York Stock Exchange, CKP. And me and some of the VCs around here, we wanted to spin it off and do something else.